ahead and call the meeting to order, and we'll go around, and I know I always do this in the wrong, basically, it's supposed to be welcome and introductions, then call to order, but
Any way you want, Madam Chair.
I think we always have done it, the call to order first, just noting. So I'm going to go ahead and go around and do introductions, starting with Commissioner Lincoln.
Sid Lykin, Lane County Board, and thank you. That's it.
Tim Elsing, Lane County Public Works Director.
Patty Giannone, City of Coburg. Because y'all coming to Coburg next month, right? For your meeting?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, we'd love to come to Coburg.
If anybody gets an extra few minutes attached to your meeting time, please come visit the Iggy Brothers new Farm Fancy store. It's amazing. Add a little time.
I'm Ann Heath, and I am the interim city administrator right now for the city of Coburg. I've taken over for Petra while they are doing the recruitment process. I'm normally the finance director.
Great. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Bill Johnston from ODOT. Franny will not be here this morning.
Brenda Wilson, Lane Council of Governments.
Paul Thompson, Lane Council of Governments.
Gary Wildish, Lane Transit District Board.
Kurt Corey, Public Works Director of the City of Eugene.
Lucy Venus, Mayor of Eugene.
Lynn Taylor, Minutes Recorder.
Gino Grimaldi, City of Springfield.
Hillary Wiley, City of Springfield Counselor.
And let's start over here. Well, let's start with that person sitting all by himself.
Kelly Hale, Lane Transit District. Emma Newman, City of Springfield.
Tom Boyle, City of Springfield.
David Reeser, Lane County.
Dan Costa, Lane Council of Governments.
Carlene Riley, River Road resident. Ellen Courier, Lane Council of Governments.
Kelly Clark, Lane Council of Governments.
Rob Interfeld, City of Eugene.
Jeff Brennan, City of Coburg.
Well, for Better Eugene Springfield Transportation.
And Lane Council of Governments.
Howard Schussler, Lane Council of Governments.
Annette Spicker, Development and Public Works Director for the City of Springfield.
Great. Well, thank you all. The first item on the agenda is to approve the meeting minutes. I'm looking for a motion.
Move approval.
And a second.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is any adjustments to the agenda or any announcements, and I will say there is an adjustment to the agenda, and it is 6B, congestion mitigation, the CMAQ funding. The state CMAQ funding group, for which I am a member, and Paul Thompson and Tom Schwetz are members. We are meeting tomorrow, hopefully to make a decision about future CMAQ funding, and so we were going to table this until after that meeting because anything we say today could change tomorrow. So rather than talk about it today, it's just wait and do a report next time, okay? Other than that, are there any other adjustments on the calendar or on the agenda? Okay. Seeing none, I would move on to comments from the audience, and I do have one person signed up. And it is Carlene Riley.
Thank you. I'm Carlene Riley of 395 Marion Lane, Eugene, and I want to speak about rail yard contamination. I'm not sure what the proper jurisdiction is for oversight of the rail yard. They seem to be an entity unto themselves, but it is a transportation problem. A very observant neighbor sent me a notice of a public meeting about a proposal for the final cleanup of the rail yard. Most of you are aware of the 100 years of dumping of toxic waste like oil, cleaning substances, asbestos, and arsenic. The first organized work to attend to this groundwater and air pollution began about 2 decades ago. About 15 years ago, I started attending community meetings to learn about the problems and determine what actions could be taken to clean up and protect the health of our neighbors in the River Road and Train Song neighborhoods. 50 to 100 people usually showed up at these meetings. At the current meeting on May 22nd, less than 10 interested parties showed up, and that was fewer in number than the people from the DEQ, Union Pacific, and CH2M Hill. Public noticing was practically non-existent. When I received this information, I sent it out to over 100 people on my mailing list, and it was posted on the River Road Facebook page. The DEQ is wanting neighbors to submit comments on the final cleanup plan by June 15. It may not be intentional, but it seems as though they really don't want to have any publicity, so they don't have to deal with any objections from neighbors. Our health and well-being are at risk, and we are being disempowered. If there are other appropriate venues for this public noticing, please alert the community. If this is something you can work on in your individual jurisdictions, our neighbors would be most grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. That was the only person who signed up to speak. So the next item on the agenda is legislative update, and Paul is going to give our presentation.
Yes, good morning, thank you. So I just passed out, and there are extra copies over there, of a summary of the first draft of the transportation package legislation that was released at about 5:03 last night, and had an hour-and-a-half meeting where the drafters walked the Joint Committee on Transportation, Preservation, and Modernization through it. The actual bill is 298 pages long, and not entirely easy to read, but I tried to create a summary, which is the document I just passed out, of most of the bill. I created this and have sent it out electronically to staff, and I said pass it out to you. And just so you know, I also, in the role of managing the Oregon MPO Consortium, sent this out to all of the other MPO managers around the state, so that's why it includes mention not just in sections of our MPO, but of the other MPOs in Oregon. I think it's illustrative to see that for all the MPOs. So what I'd like to do today is walk you through this 11 pages pretty quickly. The good news is that this is, for the most part, very consistent with the concepts that we showed you last month, with the concepts that we've been updating you as they've been developed over the past several months by the Joint Committee. So there's not striking differences here. But there are some things that I'll highlight as we go through it. So I'd like to do that, and since it is, it follows the structure of the bill and it's organized by section, I think I will just tackle a section at a time and see if there's any questions rather than do all 11 pages at once. So the first section is accountability. If you recall, there was a work group of the Joint Committee specifically on accountability. The accountability section of the bill really has 3 sections. The first is the Oregon Transportation Commission. One of the significant sections here is that they are suggesting that the OTC should now appoint the ODOT director after consultation with the governor. That would be a change. And that the governor can remove OTC members only after a notice and a public hearing. She can now do that at her pleasure, so that was a little bit of a change. And then as you go through the rest of what's basically on page 1, it talks about giving the OTC staff, allowing them to appoint officers and employees. It talks about giving them a role in several different areas, including developing a 20-year long-range plan that includes a list of projects capable of being accomplished using the resources reasonably expected. Interestingly enough, that's the exact same federal language that we have for the MPO's long-range plan that you just adopted last month. Your 20-year plan is constrained to reasonably expected revenues. The legislature is now asking the OTC to do that statewide. Down near the middle of the page, it talks about the OTC forming a continuous improvement advisory committee. There had been talk early on in the Joint Committee of expanding the membership of the OTC itself, That is no longer in here. In its place, essentially, is this Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee, which would have stakeholders beyond the commission members and would inform the OTC. They also want the OTC to develop a uniform set of standards for reporting on transportation infrastructure, the condition of the infrastructure, and they're talking about this being uniform standards across the state, county, and city systems. The next to last bullet on page 1, the first level bullet is the OTC shall develop a website. We've talked about that previously. This is basically the transparency website that the legislature wants to see. And then the last major bullet is a written analysis of costs and benefits of proposed projects. That's an interesting concept and quite an undertaking. But it basically says that the OTC should be, before they submit a proposal, before the DOT submits a proposal for a transportation for the OTC, the department shall analyze the costs and benefits, and then it gives you some of the sub-bullets about what should be considered in there. The final bullet on page 2 on this section is the OTC shall designate an internal auditor for the Department of Transportation. So that is taking the current audit function in the DOT from the DOT to the OTC. And again, we've mentioned that before. Second section under accountability is a joint committee on transportation. What this essentially does is makes the current joint committee a standing permanent committee. So they would continue to have oversight over the OTC and the DOT as a joint committee. I mentioned that there were 3 sections to accountability. The third section that's not in here dealt with the ODOT itself. I didn't put it in here because really all it did was conform some of the things to the changes in the OTC section around oversight of the director and stuff like that. So are there any questions or discussion on the accountability section? Okay. No. Hearing none, we'll move on. Highway maintenance, preservation, and seismic upgrades. So there's 2 things that are important to note here before I get into some of the specifics. I think the most important thing to note is that this section takes the vehicle registration fees, the title fees, and the fuel taxes and dedicates them entirely to maintenance, preservation, and seismic. Currently, those 3 revenue sources are used for those things, but also used for modernization, for capacity, and other improvements. This part of the legislation would really direct, in addition to increasing those fees, directs those fees entirely to maintenance, preservation, and seismic upgrades. So that is an important change. You can see quickly under registration fees how it increases initially some fees, and basically what it does is it starts to tier them by electric or miles per gallon efficiency. The idea being that the more efficient vehicles are not paying their fair share through the gas tax because they don't use gas in the case of all electric vehicles, or they use less in the case of high mileage vehicles. Of course, there is some pushback on this as a potential disincentive to people buying more efficient vehicles. But you can see at the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3 how it phases in greater and greater fees over the next 8 to 10 years. It does the same thing for title fees, so I won't repeat myself there. And then at the bottom of page 3 is the state fuel tax increase. That currently is at 30 cents. It would immediately increase it, well, as of January 1st, by 6 cents, and then by an additional 2 cents every 2 years, for a total of a 14-cent increase by January 1st, 2024. This is, again, consistent with what we had already seen as of last month. I'm going to jump to page 4, because this is that new, all of the language on page 4 and the top of page 5 about how these fees are now dedicated. So I'm going to try and walk through page 4 very quickly. The first bullet is just a continuation of what you already know exists, which is the 50-30-20 split between the DOT and the counties and the cities. The second bullet really gets into details of how the DOT share should be used, or must be used. So it gives the first $10 million to safety projects, and this is, again, of the 50% that goes to the DOT. It then distributes second a number of dollars to the 5 ODOT regions, and then $10 million to regions 4 and 5 joint project. Those projects are specified down below, so it does essentially earmark that set of money under B. Third, after the 10 million for safety and the earmarks to the 5 regions, it talks about the remaining money being dedicated 40% for bridges, 30% for seismic improvements, 24% for maintenance and replacement of highway pavement and culverts, and 6% for highway maintenance, preservation, and safety improvements. The rest of page 4 and top of page 5 is how the earmarked money under subsection B is distributed. And you might want to just jump down to region 2 in the middle of the page. The money is distributed to region 2 should be distributed or spent as follows. And notice that the sub-bullet E there is distributed to Lane County for territorial highway. So essentially that would fund the jurisdictional transfer of territorial highway. And then also in Lane County, obviously outside the NPO, is sub-bullet G, which would be funding additional passing lanes west of Oak Ridge on Highway 58. Those are the only two that would be in Lane County out of those earmarks. I think I will stop there and see if there's any questions about those fees and their purposes.
Questions, yeah.
Back on page 4, second dot, Region 2 is earmarked for 107 million as opposed to much smaller amounts for the other regions.
Yes.
What is that based on?
Well, I can't say for certain, but I will tell you what I believe is that first of all, Region 1 is getting significant earmarks. Region 1 being the Portland metro area, getting significant earmarks in other sections of the bill for the congestion improvement projects that are later on, and we'll get to those. They're getting $1 billion later on in specific earmarks. And then when you look at the rest of it, the proportions are not that unreasonable, 108 million, 35, 25, 24 million, when you compare Region 2 to 3, 4, and 5 that are much smaller population regions. So really that small amount for Region 1 is because their major funding in this bill is in another section that we'll get to shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Alan.
Well, that's a similar question, but so I can't remember, I've seen the map many times. Can you describe regions 1 through 5?
Region 1 is the Portland metro area. Essentially, Region 2 is Western Oregon from Lane County up through Astoria. Region 3 is Southwestern Oregon. Region 4 is Central Oregon. Region 5 is Eastern Oregon.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yes, Tim.
So under the 34% for seismic improvements, do you have, it doesn't say for state highways and bridges, do you have any idea if that will be distributed to local agencies as well?
I do not have an idea on that one for sure. I can look into that. And I don't believe that the language was any more specific, but we can get back to you on that.
Other questions?
And I'm sorry I stopped too soon. If I should have mentioned top of page 5, or just below the top of page 5. There is actually one last dedication of these funds, and that's important, just to safe routes to schools. There's 2 things that I highlighted in there. Basically, there's an initial allocation of $6 million to Safe Routes to Schools funds to provide matching grants, and then starting after that initial allocation, there's a $10 million per year allocation to Safe Routes to Schools for statewide matching grants.
So is that the quarter mile?
It is intended for the quarter mile, and the match level is specified. I didn't put all of that in here in that section. I think it might have been, excuse me. Yes, we'll get to some of those details later because on page 11 it gets to some of the details. Okay, Brendan, just let me know that the language on those seismic improvements is not more clear or specific. So if there's no other questions, I'll move on to Connect Oregon. This is one that we didn't know was coming necessarily, and even a legislator or two last night said, oh, so we're earmarking the first round of Connect Oregon. And yes, the next section does essentially say that the next round of Connect Oregon will be $71.9 million, and here's what it will fund. So you'll notice right away, the first thing is Lane County for the Valley Transmodal Facility, $25 million. You've heard some discussions here. There's been more discussions at the Lane Act meetings and with the Oregon Freight Advisory Committee about needing a Southern Willamette Valley Intermodal Transfer Facility for freight. That has made it into this bill and has directed $25 million for that facility to Lane County. So we believe that's a good thing, although to be honest, the language is no more specific than that. That's the only mention of it in the 300 pages. And so what exactly that becomes is not as clear. Commissioner Lycan, I don't know if you have any more insight to that because you are familiar with this topic.
Yes, he does.
I'm very familiar with the topic. What I will tell you at this point in time is that that's the language, and they will be asking us to fill in the details and identify certain sites, which I would suggest at this point in time we probably have 2 sites that are going to be seriously looked at. Probably one will score a little higher than the other one, and I think we'll leave it at that for now. Mm-hmm. But it's actually very exciting. Believe it or not, it's Eastern Oregon legislators put this in. I just happen to have a relationship with them.
The next bullet under Connect Oregon is a little bit of a shift in that it increases the match requirement for private entities to 50%. This would primarily, not exclusively, but primarily be the private railroads and perhaps private aviation or maybe some of the port improvements or other such things. And then the rest of the Connect Oregon section talks about splitting Connect Oregon into 2 parts. Connect Oregon Part 1, basically air, marine, rail, and bike ped, which is sort of how it has been for some time. And Connect Oregon Part 2 are focused on transportation projects of statewide significance only for air, marine, and rail. And so what it does is it tries to put a little more emphasis on those statewide significant projects, and then at the bottom, very bottom of page 5 and the top of page 6, it talks about how to split the funding for Connect Oregon between Connect Oregon Part 1 and Connect Oregon Part 2. So, Connect Oregon Part 1 at the top of page 6 would receive 47% of the funding for aviation, marine, rail, and 7% dedicated to bicycle and pedestrian, 1% to ODOT for administering the program, and then the remaining 45% goes to Connect Oregon Part 2 statewide significant projects. And the very last bullet maintains the 10% share. That is a minimum to each of the ODOT regions. So, are there any other Connect Oregon questions? This really doesn't talk much, unless I'm missing something in the bill and I need to go back through this section perhaps. It really sets up the funding for the first round, or the next round of Connect Oregon, and like I said, earmarks it by the legislature as opposed to having a competitive grant process.
So, yeah, go ahead, Patty.
So, I understand earmarks, but all these percentages that are here are kind of surprising me. Are they based on any, like, reality? Are they based on what somebody just said, well, I like 24%, or who came up with all these percentages? Or do you know?
The Joint Committee and the people who were giving information and input to the Joint Committee came up with the percentages. That's probably about as specific as I can be. I will tell you, and you'll see more of it as I go through the rest of it. I heard numerous people in the audience last night saying to the people sitting next to them, wow, this is extremely directive. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of specifics in this bill, more than we've ever seen in a transportation package, and yet it's also much more transparent in how it was developed. And I can't say that these percentages stay the same. I expect quite a bit of things in the 300 pages to change before it's hopefully approved. Really, the idea under Connect Oregon of splitting it into 2 parts was the concern by some legislators and some stakeholders that there was too much emphasis being given or too much money being awarded to, local type projects, biped type projects, small projects that small areas wanted, as opposed to the statewide significant economic development projects. So trying to split that 45% off into part two, whereas projects of statewide significance is trying to make sure that at least that money goes towards those statewide significant projects, while maintaining the first part of Connect Oregon, the traditional part that includes the bike ped. It also limits it to 7% though. It also limits the bike ped to 7%. So it puts a cap on that. Now, that said, under Connect Oregon, while it might put a cap on bike ped, later on you're going to see where there's a whole new section for funding bike ped through a dedicated revenue source. So there's some give and take there. I can't tell you how the numbers were arrived at specifically though.
It's magic. Honestly, the fact that you use the word give and take is maybe encouraging in some way. But I have a specific question. Class 1 and Class 3 railroads, is there a very short version of the definition of what a Class 1 and what a Class 3 railroad is?
Boy, there's going to be somebody that knows this better than me, but I believe Class 1 is only in
There's only two.
Union Pacific and BNSF, and then Class 3 is the Coos Bay.
Like Port Coos Bay and some of the other smaller tracks that
Oregon
that leave off the main line. But I think the big definition is that there's only two Class 1s, and then you can go from there.
Yeah, and Class 1 is basically the big national companies, and Class 3 are the small local short lines would be the Class 3, and when Carlene spoke, it reminded me that there's God, there's railroads, and then there's the federal government. That's what the Class 1 railroads think. So anyway.
And we're not on that list.
No, we're not.
Okay, other questions? Okay.
So on page 6, moving on, this is the first section that I decided not to summarize, which was dredging. I didn't see it being necessary for this body to look at that section right now. And the small cities and counties, I didn't summarize other than to say it's what we had heard before and told you before, is that it will increase the dedicated funding to each of those two accounts, a small cities account and a small county account, by $5 million each. Basically what that does is the gas tax, vehicle registration, and vehicle title fees, again, are split 50-30-20 to the DOT, counties, and cities, but that 50-30-20 split by formula results in the small cities and the small counties getting very small amounts, so the small city and county funds supplement that funding for them. And they're increasing those two funds, and basically those have been bought into by AOC, LOC, and the other stakeholders, so I expect that to remain in the bill and pass. In the middle of page 6, it says study and report. This section of the bill, I'll just read that first bullet. The Oregon Transportation Commission shall conduct a study. The purpose of the study is to determine the proportionate share that users of vehicles that are powered by different means should pay for the cost of maintenance, operation, and improvements of the highways in this state, and whether the users of those vehicles are paying that share. In other words, this is trying to get the legislature specific information about what's happening to the gas tax and how do we get everybody to pay their fair share if they're not paying through the gas tax. Notice that they have the, 5 years, 6 years to get the study done, so it's a pretty long time. Okay, next on page 6 is one of the big sections. So this is revenue for traffic congestion relief, freight mobility, and Connect Oregon. This is mainly, the revenue source is the tax imposed on each vehicle dealer for the privilege of engaging in the business of selling taxable motor vehicles at retail in this state. So they're not actually imposing a sales tax on the vehicle, they're imposing a tax on the dealers for the privilege.
It's Section 91.
Section 91.
No, this is the use tax, this is the sales tax.
Right.
So it's separate from the privilege tax. They're proposing.
That's right, there are two.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, It's been a long 12 hours.
Yeah, I would say that Paul did an excellent job of summarizing this bill in 298-page bill into 11 pages, but I also read this bill and noticed something else.
There's two.
So there are two taxes.
Yes.
There is a sales tax on the purchase of new vehicles as well. They snuck it in, they haven't talked about it. This is the first time I've seen it.
Yeah, they actually did skip that last night.
Yeah, they completely skipped over it. Hasn't been talked about in any of the slides. I noticed it last night when I was reading this bill. They slipped the sales tax on new cars into the bill.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that was going to be my question, because I was thinking, I saw a new vehicle. So the new vehicle is as the purchaser.
New
And
taxes.
the tax, then there's an additional tax for a
There's a
dealer.
privilege tax and a use tax. There's both in the bill.
Okay.
And the privilege tax and the use tax now are both on new and used vehicles. And they reduced the amount. And they reduced the amount from originally it was going to be 1%, moving to 2% in 5 years on new vehicles only. It's now on new and used vehicles at 0.75%. And I have that in here, but Brenda is correct, and I'm going to need to modify this, that it's 0.75% privilege tax and a 0.75% use tax or sales tax. So there's two.
Both.
Sorry for missing that one.
Sid.
So, Paul, I have a question on that. So is this just automobiles? Does this include RVs? Does this?
Oh, it includes RVs. The bill even includes tanks.
Includes what?
Seriously, tanks.
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 I didn't know we were a major manufacturer of tanks in the state of Oregon.
There
Well, I
are
don't know.
people
I don't know
driving them
about-
around.
I don't know how many are sold. Is the question, but it
Or
does.
that we sell them.
There's
It
quite a
says,
list.
Okay.
Antique vehicles, bus trailers, campers, commercial buses, commercial motor vehicles, electric-assisted bicycles, fixed-load vehicles, mopeds, motor-assisted scooters, motor homes, motor trucks.
Wow.
Hold on, let me find page 22. Oh, tanks, truck, you know, so hold off on your next tank purchase. Truck, tractor, truck, trailer, worker transport bus.
And these particular taxes, do they have an estimate of how much they expect to raise?
From tanks?
Yeah.
Commissioner,
Because-
it's not in the bill. There have been estimates. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I can find it.
If I remember correctly, on the whole large scope of things, I think the number I saw, it wasn't that significant.
Oh, this use tax and privilege
Yeah.
tax? No, it's well over $1 billion.
Oh, it is?
Oh, it's huge.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Over the 10 years. Now, remember, that's
Yeah,
over 10
oh,
years.
okay, yeah, 10 years, got it, yeah, okay.
No, it's a significant, yes.
Okay, should be interesting.
So, at the very bottom of page 6, and again, sorry that I missed, there's two taxes.
Sorry.
At the very bottom of page 6, it starts to talk about how the money raised from these two new taxes will be used. 10% to the Connect Oregon Fund, and then 90% to a new congestion relief fund. And the congestion relief fund, that very last sentence on page 6, it says, monies transferred under this paragraph shall be used exclusively for construction, reconstruction, improvement, repair, maintenance, and operation of public highways, roads, streets, and roadside rest areas in this state. What's important there is that that's essentially the same language as Article 9 of the Constitution, which is the limitation on the fuel tax use. They put the same limitation on the use of this congestion relief money, but as was noted last night, this restriction is statutory as opposed to constitutional, so it could be changed in the future much easier than changing the constitutional restriction on the gas tax.
So, Paul, when it says improvement, is that basically the same as enhancement
Yes.
monies?
Yes. So then moving to page 7 is the imposition, so that was on motor vehicles. This is page 7 at the top is an excise tax. This one actually is specifically stated as essentially a sales tax. On the retail sale of taxable bicycles, which they define as wheels of at least 26 inches in diameter or $500 or more in value. That excise tax shall go into the Connect Oregon Fund to basically pay for its share of the Connect Oregon, that's 7%. That's how they're the main funding for that 7% of Connect Oregon dedicated to bike ped. Then the next section is the big one that you've heard us talk about for several months, which is essentially the NPO taxing districts. They're now calling them the congestion relief districts. So the first bullet there establishes a congestion relief district for each of the 8 Oregon NPOs. So bullet E, the Central Lane Metropolitan Planning Organization is established as the Central Lane Congestion Relief District. If this passes as is, we'll have to add yet another section to your bylaws. Which is good because Brenda's wanted to edit the bylaws for some time, so.
Yeah.
Thank keeping you up awake at night.
Yeah.
The next bullet talks about how the boundaries will be the same as the MPO, except in the case of Metro, where they've chosen to have the boundary being the urban growth boundary of Metro. It talks about, there's quite a bit of language, there's an italicized bullet there, which is my comment on, there's a lot of language in the bill about how the governing body for each district is the same as the existing MPO governing body, but legally separate and apart. As the lawyers described it last night, they put a lot of firewalls in so that when you gavel down as the MPO, you're not gaveling down as congestion relief district and vice versa. It does say that only members of a governing body listed in this subsection who are elected officials shall be voting members of the governing body of the congestion relief district. If that stays as is, LTD members could not vote on the congestion relief district. And part of the reason for that, is taxation without representation. There's a bullet in there that we think is a little curious. It says the organization consortium may not participate as an entity in any deliberations or actions undertaken by any of the districts. We're not quite sure why that's in there, except that there's that language and some other language that I didn't summarize that basically seems to try to be restricting districts getting together and forming or colluding to...
United fronts.
United fronts.
Yeah.
I find that language to be very odd.
I wonder why.
I wonder who.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh.
We think we know who, but
we know who.
We'll talk to you about
Yes.
that later. So, at the bottom of page 7 starts some specific language around the Portland Metro Congestion Relief District. I highlighted that, bolded it. And it specifically talks about the projects that are funded by this bill. So this is where that earlier mention that I made about Portland's earmarks, Portland's funding, or later on, this is where that is at the bottom of page 7. And there are a number of projects, which are the same projects that we've talked about. I-5 Rose Quarter, I-205 Bridge at Westland and Oregon City, I-205 widening, 217 northbound and 217 southbound are all specifically funded in this bill. At least in this draft. Moving on to page 8.
But the money for that would come from the specific Metro Congestion Relief District?
It would come from a combination of the state congestion relief fund and the Metro specific congestion relief fund.
Which
So
are
So
50/50.
10% goes to the state fund, right?
90% of the 2 excise taxes goes to the congestion relief fund statewide, and that fund would provide, under this language, 50% of the funding for those 5 Portland projects, and the other 50% would come from the Metro Congestion Relief District. And that's what's talked about on page 8. It says that, and I'm paraphrasing here, essentially Portland's MPO Policy Board or Joint Policy Advisory Committee may impose the following schedule of fuel taxes and registration fees. And what that does is allows them to put in an increase in the gas tax and vehicle registration fees to fund their half of those 5 projects. I put a lot of the language in here because I think it's informative to see how they structured it for Portland and might in the future structure it for us or other MPOs. I don't know if we need to go into those details today, though.
We're anticipating adjustments to that.
I don't anticipate adjustments to Portland Metro's language in here because this is what Portland wants.
No, but just to the rest of us that are.
To the rest of us, I would hope that as we potentially get projects funded under this, there would be some adjustments specific to each case or each MPO. And fortunately, in a minute, I'll get to the section that sets up that structure, and it does provide flexibility or leave flexibility for us to have that.
Just like OMPOC decided that the original concept would have called for a 50% match, that language is not in the bill. It's more flexible and open.
So we were successful in shooting down that 50%
Yeah.
requirement for now.
Great.
So starting at the top of page 9, only 3 pages left. Congestion relief districts outside Portland. So this is Mayor Lundberg where it starts to apply to us. It says that on or before December 31st, 2021, the governing body of a congestion relief district other than Portland must prepare a congestion relief program. Actually not must, may prepare a congestion relief program. So that, in shorthand, gives us 4 years from the end of this year to opt in. And to opt into the congestion relief fund from the state to make state highway improvements within this MPO, this congestion relief district. And it goes on to say that the congestion relief program has to identify the project and how it's going to be funded. And it goes on to say that there are some, under what's 3 there, projects which may be proposed by a congestion relief district under this section include but are not limited to, for the Central Lane Congestion Relief District, Delta Highway and Territorial Road Project. So, ignore that for now. That's wrong. That's not the projects that we want in there. They shouldn't be in there. First of all, it says under the Central Lane Congestion Relief District, the Territorial Road Project is not even within the MPO. As you know, it's well outside. So it can't be one of our district's projects. This was just an error, a misunderstanding of which projects are which. For the most part, we think that's what happened. Those 2 projects, Delta Highway and Territorial Road, are addressed elsewhere in the bill under jurisdictional transfers and under the funding for territorial improvements as part of the jurisdictional transfer that we already talked about under Connect Oregon. So essentially, we're going to immediately ask to have those 2 stricken from this section of the bill that we're currently talking about. And in its place, we believe as what are our illustrative projects for potential congestion relief district program in this area, we believe the language should say Beltline improvements, 42nd Street in Springfield improvements, and I-5 at Coburg interchange improvements to complete that project. We believe those 3 projects should be listed here in the bill as the projects that may be part of our future congestion relief program if we choose, or not you, but the future congestion relief district that hasn't been formed yet, chooses to submit a program. One of the things that I think we've talked about is having you give a head nod to that today. There is some immediate discussions and frankly lobbying and things that need to happen to change parts of this bill, and that's one of the things that we think needs to be changed is to strike Delta and Territorial from this part of the bill and insert the 3 projects that I just mentioned. So I'll stop there.
And there is a group going up on Monday to lobby on behalf of what's in here, and those 3 projects would be one of them that we would take forward. So we do need to have a head nod from the group that says, yes, we're okay with that group of projects. Is that I'm looking for all the heads.
Yeah,
nodding.
head nod.
Yes.
Nod.
Yes. Speak up now or forever hold your peace.
We know you can't do that.
So I'm just now finding out about your United Front group, so I will not be participating then, I assume, is that correct?
Well, the county was who's in charge of the group? Neil or?
The county was on the email list that we had.
I haven't seen it.
Okay.
I'm unaware of it. until right now.
My understanding is there's a meeting Monday afternoon with Senator Boquist that this group is having, and then also the joint committee is meeting and holding public hearings on this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
I know about the Monday, Monday public hearing, as I'm part of the panel on that, but as far as United Front, I mean, I have no issue here, but we'll be keeping territorial in the bill.
Absolutely.
Absolutely in the Connect Oregon
But-
and in the jurisdictional transfer
But as
section.
far as the, and it looks like, we talked about maybe expanding the role of the district, but they're pretty specific on the MPOs, and that's fine. We'll be looking for other matches involved in that, even though I think Lane County has contributed a huge amount of staff match that we're hoping the state will take into that effect. But besides, the big issue is the jurisdictional transfer from the state to Lane County.
Yes, and what we think the mix-up was, it was the jurisdictional transfer of territorial and Delta Highway.
Yeah.
And so that is in the bill,
Yeah.
but I think what happened is someone accidentally put it as the MPO project.
Yeah, which it
And it's
isn't.
not. However, as part of
It's
the
part of the act.
congestion relief district, there is a provision in the bill that allows a county to establish a separate district for outside the MPO area. And I don't know whether or not the county would be interested in that, but if that's where you wanted to put that project, that would better fit there, because
Yeah,
that would
I would
be
agree.
within that.
It would be a
yeah.
better fit there, and I don't mean to, I apologize, Madam Chair, so.
No, well,
I'm just having this
this is-
conversation with staff, so I
Well, this
apologize.
is- Well, this is the place to have,
Yeah.
because, there's only like a day before
Yeah.
some of us are heading up, and we want to make sure we've had the conversations and we're on, at least there's an
Yeah.
understanding we're on the same page, is there's an accounting, because we've all been working on territorial and know that it needs to be addressed, but where it's addressed,
Yeah,
and if
and
the
I-
legislature's picking the MPO boundaries
Yeah,
as
which is fine.
and then picking projects within them, then it makes the most sense to have
And
those
Senator- And
projects.
Senator Boquist is a very significant proponent of the Beltline project, which is, I gotta tell you, it's kinda nice to have somebody up north who is so involved and understands this and knows how important it is. And so, while you're meeting with him, thank you very much, is what you say to him, as much as anything. But, so I'm fine with that. I just don't know if the county will have somebody there as part of United Front project, which I'm not sure it's even all that necessary. I think that the projects you mentioned are really within Eugene and Springfield, so I don't know if it's necessary or not. I know I have a conference call on Monday afternoon, and then I'll be up there Monday evening for the testimony. I'll be on a panel regarding counties, so not just Lane County, but it's the associate Oregon counties.
Well, I would want to encourage having someone, because it's still, the county is one of,
Yeah.
would end up one of the voting members
No,
within the MPO
I agree.
boundaries.
I agree.
And I think it's important that we have that sort of united front look to, that, we're all going to advocate for a territorial wherever we
No,
can.
it's not that, it's just, I just found out about it now, and
Yeah,
I'm already have stuff on my schedule, so, all
yeah.
right, we'll see what we can do.
Okay, so does that make sense? There's actually a project for the Coburg, one of our groups, and Eugene and Springfield, that
So-
are the three projects, yes.
The only thing is, if the county is not able to send a representative, if we want to have just sort of a collective statement that or if there's a written statement, or if there's another way in which the county weighs in and says, we support these projects, and, if that's just offering that as a backup
Yeah.
plan, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
just so
however
that
we
the
can work it out.
And I think
Yeah.
part of that message can be carried by
Mm-hmm.
the people on Monday, after this discussion, can say that the MPO policy board has supported these three projects.
Right.
Yeah.
Which includes the
Right.
county.
Absolutely.
And that's really the
Okay,
message
that's
the
enough.
legislature's
Okay.
looking for.
Yep,
Yeah.
I agree. But I think on this one, so Lucy and Christine, you're both going to be there.
Mhm.
I think having the two mayors is probably as important as anything.
Okay.
And, I mean, that's just from my experience,
Mm-hmm.
people come with them, so I think that would be really good.
So
All right.
we are clear to carry the message to change those projects on that line.
Yes, everybody's fine.
Thank you.
All right. good.
So the remainder of page 9 talks about how the congestion relief program that a district may develop should be considered and drawn up. And then at the bottom of page 9, it talks about submitting that program to the OTC. And at the top of page 10, it says that once the OTC has approved it, they have to submit it to the legislature for legislation to actually enact it. So it's a multi-step process in order to opt in. And opting in means getting projects funded. Again, it's nice that there's complete flexibility or openness about how it's funded. In other words, what local contribution or match there would be. It does talk about, you having to be very specific about that. And then one other concern that we want to raise that we've identified in this is that it does say on or before December 31st, 2021. We have two concerns with that. First of all, some of the MPOs have already said to me in the past, 16 hours that that may not be enough time for them to determine which projects they would like to have in their congestion relief program over the next 10 years and how they'll be able to contribute to funding them. Even 4 years may not be enough time. But the other bigger concern, and I'm not sure whether you feel that's enough time for us to do that, or our future congestion relief district board to do that. But the other concern is that the legislation very specifically says you can only modify it up to that date. And yet this is for a 10-year period through the 27-29 biennium. It's funding that goes through that to that biennium, but you can only modify and put in place the program through 2021. And after that, you're locked into it. So we're a little concerned about not being flexible past 2021 and whether we should advocate for maybe language that says you have to submit and get a program approved by 2021, but that maybe you could allow another couple of years for modifications to it after it's approved. Adding something like that might be useful.
Feedback about those provisions?
So,
Yes, Patty.
4 years sounds like a long time to me, so what is it that we can't, you're worried we can't do in 4 years?
I think the main concern I've heard is not so much in identifying which projects would be the priorities or you'd like to get funded. It's the provision of the local match being lined up within 4 years. It's saying that, and I'll just speak with our example that I think is facing us, is that there are a number of bond measures we all expect to have on the ballot, whether it's Lane County Public Safety or Eugene Parks or Eugene Road Maintenance or other ones, 4J School District. They're rolling out over the next several years. How do we get to a commitment to perhaps tens of millions of dollars of local match for Beltline in the next 4 years? Is that achievable? I'm not saying it's not.
That's real.
So is there a suggestion that you have?
Well, I think the main suggestion is perhaps ask for an additional clause that allows modification of an approved program after 2021.
That would give us the flexibility.
That would say, yes, we'll get your program in within 4 years and we'll get it approved within 4 years, but allow us to modify it if necessary through the length of this legislation after that, just in case things change after 2021.
Well, there's no chance that's going to happen.
So, and I would strongly agree with that. And I'm going to use this example yet again. So when I-5 Beltline interchange, and they wanted the match, remember Lane County was receiving over $20 million a year to the road fund. Lane County was the $15 million match. Our check this year was $900,000 based on harvest. So I think that that's very important, because what I will tell you is that all these southern counties that are the ONC counties or forest counties do not have those dollars anymore to provide match. And so we've had to be creative, like in kind, other things. I know in the past, working with OTC, that they kind of softened that, the whole match issue. Back in the day with Stuart Foster, I'm like, I could talk. Stuart Foster and even Randy, I mean, they were pretty hardcore and said, no, it's cash match, period, conversation over with, and you'll either come up with it or no project. But they've softened that, and so, but I think that's really important, and I think that's an important message to convey, that not every county has high property tax rates, and not every county is flush with road funds anymore, or jurisdictions, because you can't expect Eugene and Springfield to say, yeah, we'll cough up $10 million. We got it right in our hip pocket. It doesn't work that way. So I think that's really important.
Another possible source of funding for match for these state projects is the MPO's federal funding. You can use the federal funds to contribute to one of these projects. Now, you're probably not going to want to dedicate all of our $4 million or so per year in STP funds to Beltline for 25 years, but you might want to dedicate a small portion to one of the smaller projects that we want to see funded. And we typically only commit the MPO funding for 2 to 4 years at a time. So asking us by 2021 to commit it all the way through 27 or 29, again, just doesn't feel right.
And I'll agree with that too, that if there's one thing I'll complain about for just about anything that has to do with transportation, it's the inflexibility, or even our land use, is we lock ourselves into positions that then causes either a ton of extra work, a ton of extra time, and a ton of extra money, or we just have to give up on something because we don't have enough flexibility to be able to adjust to what we need to do. So I agree that flexibility in that time frame and how we go about doing this, because we haven't even figured out the taxing district issue and matching and how much match, et cetera, that outside of Portland wanted to do this, and they've set it up to benefit themselves, and the rest of us are coming along behind, and we have to figure out what that means for us, how we want to do it or not do it, and then how we figure out our funding, how our funding is going to fit into that picture. And I agree, the smaller areas, they don't have any chance of being able to come up with this kind of money. It's only the Portland area, I think, that both Brenda and Paul have said, have the population base that can have the opportunity to raise enough money. The rest of us don't even have a top population base that's going to support huge amounts of taxes that are going to come up with big matches and things.
So I guess I want to ask if there's, again, head nods, and maybe Neil over there is capturing it as another talking point for Monday's United Front meeting around the request for flexibility in the congestion relief program that a district would submit after 2021, flexibility to adjust it.
Okay, so looking for head nods from everyone, that's good with everyone? Okay, looks like we've got it.
Hey, Paul, is one of your, do you know if one of your meetings, will you be meeting with Representative McEwen at all? Is that on the list? Because if so, hit her hard with this very piece, because Coos County gets this.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm looking for my glass of water.
Do you want to get a glass of water, Paul? We don't want our speaker to go dehydrate.
While Neil's pulling up the list.
Would you like to hear it?
Yes, please.
It's Krasansky, Manning, Holby, Lively, Barnhart, Fire, Fahey.
Okay, so it's just our delegation.
By Senator Byers.
Okay, well, Senator Byer gets this too.
Okay,
All right.
so I'll move on. That was probably one of the most significant sections for the MPO. Moving on, task force on mega transportation projects. So the bill would form a task force on mega transportation projects, which is defined as projects that cost at least $500 million to complete, that attract a high level of public attention or political interest because of substantial direct or indirect impacts, or that require a high level of attention to manage the project successfully. And this task force would consist of senators, representatives, 3 governor appointees, and the OTC would appoint 2 of their members. And basically, it would study how Oregon selects and approves those huge projects. So it's another form, it almost, to me, could have been in the accountability section of the bill. It's another form of accountability and oversight. Next on page 10 is the public transit section. This is another new tax. This is the payroll tax on employees, of 0.1% of the wages. And it would go into a statewide transportation improvement fund, and that would be used to finance investments and improvements in public transportation services except for light rail. And at the bottom of page 10, it specifically says 85% goes to qualified entities, where they would receive at least $100,000. 10% would be competitive grant. 4% would be to intercity providers, and 1% to the DOT to administer it. This is generally what we expected to see in the transit funding section of the bill. I don't know if LTD has any comments on it. Brenda, you had some observations?
Well, I think it was generating around $110 million a year.
Yes.
For LTD?
For transit? No, statewide.
Just statewide. I was
Yeah.
going to say, wow, that was pretty good.
Hooray! An annual amount of at least $100,000. One thing that I noted in the bill is that the competitive grants, the 10% that would go to competitive grants, LTD would not qualify for those. I don't know if LTD has an issue with that, but just point that out.
But if you'll notice in the Connect Oregon portion of the document, transit is no longer a part of the Connect Oregon.
Right.
And we've received a number of grants through Connect Oregon. So this tends to replace LTD's connection or Connect Oregon grants. And we're estimating that we're looking between 5 and 7 million would be the portion that we would probably get on the formula. And of course, it's lower the first year and it grows through the years.
The thinking here is that while transit has been part of Connect Oregon for years, it's a competitive grant program. It's not a certainty. It's not something that you can plan for or budget for in the long term. And so this would give that 85% that's distributed by formula, 5 to 7 million per year to LTD, gives them certainty, and you said replaces the competitive grant process. The 10% that goes to transit outside of mass transit districts is to allow those small providers to apply for competitive grants for funding for their service and other needs. And part of the reason that the small entities have to go through a competitive grant process rather than just getting a formula allocation is because there is some concern by the legislators about small districts or small providers being able to handle money just given to them by formula, whether they're, frankly, would know what to do with the money. So they want specific competitive grant applications and review of what they would use it for before being awarded money.
And Paul is just relaying comments that he has heard from members of the committee.
That was not my comment.
Yes.
Correct. So, I'll move on.
One question.
Yes.
The employers in this section, is that, I don't remember, just private sector employers, or is it all employers, public sector?
All employers, all employees would pay.
All in.
It actually comes out of the employee, it's an employee tax.
It's an employee tax. Thank you.
And Paul, do you want to give, there's a breakdown of your minimum wage and just maybe a couple examples.
Someone who makes minimum wage would pay $36 a year.
Yes.
A year?
It was about $36 a year.
$36 a year.
Okay.
So.
Is that helpful, Patty?
Yes, thank you. I'd forgotten that piece. I was thinking budget.
It was $36 a year.
Yeah, I can't.
And the 1/10 of 1%. So if you're earning $50,000 a year, and it's on gross, so if you're earning $50,000 a year, it would be $50 a year.
And the employer is based It has to be an Oregon employer.
Yes. Well, no, it has to
No.
be employment in Oregon.
An employee,
Employment.
yeah, because this is something the employee pays.
Okay, gotcha.
Right.
Including the
So if you're earning a wage where someone controls your work in the state of Oregon, you would pay this.
Okay.
Public and private.
It would be withheld from your salary by your employer, but it's out of your salary paid by you, not paid by the employer.
So that includes the federal government?
That's a really interesting question that always comes up, right?
Probably not.
Yeah, but usually then how they do that is they have an offset, right? So I don't know how that would work. Counselor Zelenka.
Offset meaning we don't have to pay this and you can't make us, those two things?
Yeah, how it's been handled in the past is, well, they don't want to discriminate against Oregonians, against the federal employees, so they kind of give a break. So I don't know how they would set that up. That's a really interesting question.
Could we get an answer? I'm not, but, you know.
We could try to get an answer. So yeah, we'll ask federal.
Yeah, not for anything right now, but just for future reference. Okay, so to keep us moving along here.
All right, I will. Page 11, last page. Safe routes to schools. This is where I mentioned earlier that the specific on the safe routes to schools funding is provided. It's a matching grant program that would require 40% match. However, there is a reduced 25% match requirement for cities of 5,000 or less, or if the project reduces hazards within a safety corridor as defined by the commission by rule. So this would go to the OTC for rulemaking. And then it goes on to talk about it has to be within a quarter-mile radius of a school that is either pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, or grades 1 through 8, or grades K through 12. In other words, everything except a standalone high school. And then it talks about what it needs to do: improve sidewalks, reduce speeds, improve crossings, create bike lanes, or improve diversion. So it establishes for the first time a statewide Safe Routes to Schools program. There is some concern about the quarter mile not being big enough. There's some concern about the 40% match being too big a hurdle. These things might change before the bill is passed.
I'll be curious to see how they define a safety corridor. ODOT has a different concept.
Yep. So moving on, unless there's questions on that, I skipped another section of the bill, roadside rest areas. I thought I'd just leave that one out. There's actually pages and pages of specificity there. And then the last section is literally titled Transportation Generally. It does a number of housekeeping things. It spends pages talking about electric generation and other things. The one thing I wanted to mention in this section is that it does put into the bill and would enact these 4 specific jurisdictional transfers. And again, notice number 2 and 3 are the ones we talked about earlier. And that's it.
Wow. Thank you. That was incredible.
Yeah, well, they're not done yet.
Next, you're going to summarize
Tim.
War and Peace.
You had a question about jurisdictional transfer?
I would also say that that's incredible work. Thank you so much, Paul. But under the second bullet point on jurisdictional transfers, if we could get that changed to upon upgrade to Lane County standards, Lane County to transfer jurisdiction of portion territorial highway. Territorial highway is 42 miles of road that the county would have to begin maintenance of. And without some funding or without upgrades to county standards, that's just not something that we can do.
So does the section on page 5 under Connect Oregon that earmarks 25 million, no, not there, I'm sorry, wrong one. Where is it? Page 4. Page 4, thank you. Somebody is behind me. The language on page 4, money is distributed to Region 2, distributed to Lane County for territorial highway following jurisdictional transfer. That is providing Lane County the funding for that jurisdictional transfer. And it doesn't specify the amount.
Yeah.
And we probably need to.
Where is that from?
Page 4, under the use of the registration, title, and fuel revenues, fuel tax revenues. Recall up near the top, it earmarks 107.95 million for Region 2. And within Region 2, it earmarks an unspecified amount to Lane County for the territorial highway jurisdictional transfer. I think that's what you're asking for. I don't know why there's not a specific dollar amount attached to those specific projects. Or any of those. So we do, somehow they came up with 107.95 million, so they must know what each of those numbers is to get to a total, but they didn't reveal them, so we could probably find out.
Okay, and David, do you remember what we had discussed?
Yeah, so the question I think was it getting at how much the jurisdictional transfer was? So Lane County's been working with ODOT on some estimates, and we came up, I think it was around 23 million for the 40-mile stretch, but that did not include the shorter segment that's we're doing the design pieces on.
There's a 5-mile section that is already in the bill for 20 million.
Yeah, that's the piece that they're talking about being funded for construction. And then the full, like you said, the full 40-plus miles for jurisdictional transfer. We worked with ODOT on a cost estimate to bring that up to fully maintained status, and that was about 23 million, if I recall correctly.
And that didn't include bridge upgrades.
That's right.
So I think you have identified more work and certainly needs to go into that.
And the only other thing that I would mention is the seismic upgrades don't specifically mention the Cascadia impact zone, nor does it mention that any funding would be available for local entities.
Correct. Correct. Frankly, I believe that there's been a lot of discussion and recognition by the committee and that work group that there's not enough money to get to full seismic preparedness, and so they're really focusing on the state lifeline routes and Highway 58, I-5, Highway 97.
Paul, I think your second bullet under transportation generally on page 11, I think, thank you. Because it was a typo. If ODOT's actually going to transfer the territorial highway jurisdiction, not the county, right?
I noticed that, I would agree.
Well, again, I extracted language, and it really is, it's directing to Lane County to transfer jurisdiction. You're right, it's not worded, it doesn't sound right in the way I extracted it, but I think it's right in the full context of the bill. But I'll double check that.
Any other comments?
It says from the department to the county, so that's the right part.
Any other comments or questions about Linear? Yes,
I just have one point, and Paul didn't put this in his summary because it really only applies to the city of Eugene, but I thought it was very interesting, and while we might not have cared about it before, I think we care about it after this last winter, the snow.
Salt?
If at least 2 inches of snow accumulates on the ground within a 12-hour period, a city with the population of 160,000 or more, so Eugene, Salem, shall salt the highways and use snowplows in the areas affected by the adverse weather. The city shall continue to salt the highways and use snowplows on the affected highways until the city determines it is safe to drive on the highways. This applies to 25% of the vital city highways within the boundaries of the affected city. If dangerous driving conditions last longer than 24 hours, the affected city shall salt at least 35% of the vital city highways. And for the purposes of this section, the city determines which of its highways are vital city highways. So I thought that was interesting. Shall. Get your big, huge piles of salt ready to go.
This is one of those sections that is highly directive.
Isn't that an unfunded mandate?
What?
Unfunded mandate.
Yes, it's my understanding piles of salt are very expensive. Yes. So anyways, just thought I'd point that out. You might want to have a conversation about that.
There's actually 3 or 4 or 5 pages of that language. That was only part of it.
Yeah.
Of different things like that?
Of snow and salt
Snow,
specifically.
salt.
Where's that coming from? What?
In the issue that happened in Portland where everyone was stranded, cars were towed to who knows where, and ODOT finally decided that they would salt in certain areas, but there were some people who felt like they should have salted before that occurred.
Why don't they just make it above 250,000? It's a Portland issue.
Except it specifically says for cities of a population of 160 or more, and as you know, the city of Eugene.
That's just Eugene and Salem and
yes.
Portland.
Right.
So you could
just say 250,000 or more, or 500,000 more,
Sure.
it's just Portland. If it's a Portland issue, it should be Portland fixed.
Why not just say the Metro Service District?
Yeah.
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 That's a good change.
We'll try to come after us. So, did you want to fall on your sword on that one?
Oh, we'll try to break that out.
Okay.
Or change.
Patty?
I just have one more comment, and that is, people in Oregon are going to be paying out of their paychecks. They're going to be paying at the gas pumps for all of this, and so I get this. Trying to put some dates in there like 2021. They better see something happening, because I would want to see something happening if I knew I was paying for roads. So while you're talking about the flexibility of being able to adjust things after 2021, I'd say keep that sense of urgency, because they have to be feeling that at the legislature, that they're going to have something to show for all of these additional fees and taxes on people. So.
No, I think the council has a very good point, and I think that's why the 2021 deadline is in there, is because they want to show that things are going to happen. They want to say that you're going to get, you need to opt in, you need to demonstrate this stuff. They also feel like the longer you let it go, the more the future legislatures could change this.
Yeah.
So.
More expensive. Yeah.
Sid.
And the one thing that and not that you glossed over anything, Paul, but I think the important, what really wasn't talked about was at the very beginning, 50-30-20 split. And when you talk about this increase, because we've kind of ran some numbers, and Lane County in the first year could receive an additional $8 million for operation and maintenance, and in year 10, it's over $15 million. So for operation and maintenance, which, by the way, when it comes to your jurisdiction, so Eugene will receive money, Springfield, Coburg, you'll receive additional dollars coming in based on the formula. It's operation and maintenance, but that could be used for potential matches on different projects that they may be looking at. That could pay for your salt. And, so there you go. Alan, that's going to pay for your salt. Congratulations on the formula. But I think that's really important, because that's a lot of money that's coming in that really hasn't been coming in the past for jurisdictions.
Yeah. Paul?
There's actually, an ODOT employee actually put up on the web a calculator that allows every single city and county in the state to see what would result in their 50-30-20 share if it's this gas tax, vehicle registration, and title fee increase. And I shared that with all of your staff, and so yes, you can look up and see what you would get.
It's pretty interesting.
And we can send that out again. It's just a link to our webpage.
Yes, Charlie.
Paul, do you know how much the registration, title, and fuel tax fees will generate on an annual basis? I mean, the fuel tax goes up, but...
Yes, I do, but not off the top of my head, but I have a spreadsheet that actually shows that, and I can send that out.
Yeah, you can send that. So the way that this is written and proposed for both the registration and title fees is it flies in the face of policy that has been the state policy and federal policy for decades and decades, which is you don't disincentivize people by giving them a penalty for getting higher gas mileage. Not to mention completely inconsistent with the state's climate change policy, but this is all about equity of trying to get everybody who uses the road to pay the same amount. This won't do that, but that's what this is about.
It is about that.
And it overrides all those other things that we've been trying to say for decades and decades.
I would suspect that that is entirely what it's about, is trying to deal with the fact that people aren't contributing through the gas tax like they used to because of changes in technology and all-electric vehicles. I would also suspect that this tiered approach to those vehicle registration fees and title fees would possibly go away if at some point Oregon actually imposes or it moves to a per mile fee instead of a gas tax fee.
Well, that was my next question, was there any discussion about shifting to a different model away from gas tax?
There was a lot of discussion about it. There were some people that wanted to move to it sooner than later, but there is that study that's in here. The result was a study within 6 years to figure out how the shares are being, the burden is being, borne.
Right, the proportional share study.
Yeah.
So that's the avenue for proposing a different
yes,
way of doing funding, like pay-as-you-drive.
Yes.
Insurance and vehicle fees. Okay, good, thanks.
I'll just like that, I think I've advocated for the fact that we have so much deterioration now. We have such a backlog that the quickest, easiest way to address it is a gas tax that everybody's familiar with. It's not a trying to figure it out, or there isn't a lot of opposition to it, and maybe nobody wants to pay more. Many of our communities figured that out last November. But it's still, the idea is that we need to do something sooner rather than later, and eventually we will have to look to some other method or a complementary method to funding our roads. But right now, if we can do something and actually get it through the legislature, which is the first hurdle, we're all going to be able to benefit from that. So all of us will make some sort of a sacrifice in one way or another to be able to get there. So I want to kind of keep my eye on the prize, which is a transportation package for which we all will receive funding that will help us address our backlogs and maybe, help preserve our cars. My car, they just hit a big pothole out near Delta and also near my street. So it was, just yesterday, and I just got new tires. So it was, so anyway, that it's still that sort of concept is let's try to take care of what we've got right now and look to the future of what we're going to do, and we will have to do something. But I'm hopeful that we'll get a transportation package passed this time. So, any other questions about this, and knowing that some of us will be up there on Monday to help persuade the legislature to move forward. Okay? Anything else that you needed on that, Paul?
I don't think so.
Don't think so?
No. There's, like I said, 4 days of public hearings next week. I believe they're going to move it to the House floor the week after next. And then stay tuned, because it's not a certainty.
Yes. Yeah,
Honestly, it's not a certainty in my mind. If I'm not speaking out of turn, it's not a certainty in my mind because of this package. It's not a certainty in my mind because of full slate of everything the legislature still has to deal with. And this might get tangled up in that.
Yes. Alan?
My understanding is that last year this got blocked by the Republicans about the low carbon fuel standard and that trade-off, and so it didn't get passed. So this year, my understanding is that there's a lot of pressure for business and truckers and other entities that are saying we absolutely need to do this. Don't hold up this for the low carbon fuel standard. Is that what your understanding is still?
I've heard very little mention of low carbon fuel standard, but
it just popped up this week.
But I have heard it mentioned once or twice. But what I have heard more is it could be held up. This, even though it's independent, not general fund, etc., could be held up if the proposed new tax on businesses or the proposed solution for the health funding or dealing with PERS are satisfactory to certain constituents or parts of the legislature.
Because this is imposed tax, so they need 2/3 or 60%.
It's a 2/3.
2/3.
Yeah.
2/3 vote, so they absolutely need
in both chambers.
Yeah, right forward.
All right. So you'll keep us informed.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so next is our Central Lane MPO Safe Communities Program. Steve and Ellen?
It's actually Ellen.
Just Ellen?
Steve's not here.
Okay.
We've made some progress on our media event, so I wanted to give you all an update on that and just kind of get a head nod that we're moving in the right direction. We've been working with the Lane County Public Information Officer who's going to be helping us organize the event. We'll be writing a press release that will talk about the problem statement, talk about our proposed solutions, and then the adopted plans from the various jurisdictions. It's going to be branded as the Safe Lane Transportation Coalition, which is the name that we've agreed on with staff. And then each of the partners will be listed, so it won't have the county or the MPO as the lead on that. It will just be under our coalition name. And what we're hoping to do is release the press release a couple of days before we have an organized event with 3 representatives from MPC and possibly the sheriff, if that works out, and have people available for interviews during that time. We'll be providing the press with locations for them to go around the community and get footage for their story, and hopefully we'll have commitment from them that they'll be there during this interview time. It'd be probably an hour or so in the morning. And the timeline for that is actually pretty quick. We're hoping to do that in the middle of June, so the 2 weeks, the 19th or the 26th. So that's kind of the strategy right now. It won't be a public press conference. We were kind of advised against doing that because typically you don't get a lot of press coverage and it's a lot of effort to organize something like that, whereas scheduling interviews during a short period of time seems to be a little bit more effective way to get coverage for that. And then hopefully over the summer, we would like to try to work with people to do editorials and have the safety message reinforced throughout the summer as we roll out our programming. So that's kind of the update. I don't know if anybody has questions about that plan, concerns, comments?
Comments, questions? Okay. Yes, Gary?
A few meetings back, we were told about Lane County's position on fatalities as we being the highest in the state of Oregon. And getting that message out, because I've spread that message to friends of mine and they were shocked that that's where we're at. And this is a great opportunity to educate the public. And I think that if we can do that, then maybe we'll be able to do some other things to help this issue, because I'm not very proud that we're the top of the list on fatalities. It's rather embarrassing.
The rollout of the press release is not about we've adopted a safety plan. The tagline, the first comment is, we lead the state in traffic fatalities. And so that's what we're talking about. That's what we're leading with. And then we're going to talk about what it is that we're doing together in order to combat that. So great point. Yes, we're focusing on that.
Thank you.
And you say it so well, Gary. I bet that you would be a wonderful spokesperson.
If I'm in town.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Any other questions or comments? No, well, thank you for doing this. And
You're welcome. So we'll be working with your staff to organize
Yes.
with you all to
Yes.
schedule that. So
Great.
thank you.
Thank you.
When was that?
June 19th.
June.
Yeah, it'll either be the 19th or the 26th, depending on availability.
Or 26th.
Next item is a letter of support for the OTC vacancy.
Yes.
And we have a copy of that.
Yes, I placed a copy of the draft letter at your places. We expect a vacancy on the OTC. Commissioner Lohman will be at the end of his term. And Kitty Piercy has already submitted her application, and she is looking for letters of support. I've drafted a letter of support from the MPC for her, and I provided that. If you're okay with that, I have a copy for Chair Lundberg to sign.
Move to send this letter of recommendation.
Second.
For Kitty Piercy.
All those in discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. I will sign the letter before I
Thank you.
leave today, if you
Super.
catch me. Okay, next item is our follow-up and next steps, an ODOT update.
I'll be brief, somewhat mundane, but ODOT offices are moving today. We back to Springfield where we properly belong.
Yes, 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 indeed, we're very happy.
We've been over on the west side of Eugene for the last 8 months, over near Highway 99. It's been nice being in Eugene too. Don't disparage Eugene. But we have a new building we'll be moving into today and
We have
tomorrow.
salted roads.
It's tastier in Eugene.
So we have a new building that's opening up just west of Pioneer Parkway, back behind Walgreens. And we're looking forward to moving in. I was up till after midnight last night packing boxes, so we're all moving.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes, very much. Okay. Was that it? Our Main Street safety update, I will say that we did kind of a check-in with the council and did an agreement that, yes, we want to do our MX study, yes, we want to do safety and look at our arts grant and make those two as seamless as possible and continue forward. And the feedback I got from the business owners was, just get on with it. So we're looking forward to getting on with it and doing that. So it was a good moment to check in, though, to make sure that everybody was on the same page. And then we're continuing to move forward with our Main Street studies. So I'm thinking maybe our rail update got covered a little bit inside of our transportation package issues, or Paul?
Maybe the only thing I'll add there is that the separate ODOT budget bill, as a reminder, I think I mentioned this last month, the separate ODOT budget bill does contain sufficient funding to continue the existing level of service on passenger rail between Portland and Eugene. But one of the feedbacks I heard last night immediately is that this package does nothing to advance or improve or increase service. So that is something else that is an option for commenting on.
That's what, 9 million?
I think it was 8.6 a year or something like that in the budget bill, but 8.7. But again, there's already been comments that this does nothing to improve or increase, and as this body has noted, that would be a goal leading up to the 2021 event.
Yes, yes. Hillary?
Well, I would think, I worked on that high-speed rail commission with Kitty, and it would really be nice if where it meant in this bill where it mentions the railroads, class 1, class 3, anyway, that if somewhere in there that we need a study that can keeps this in front of the people's eyes. So during this time, if they were doing a study on furthering the stretch between Portland and Eugene for high-speed rail, or rail transit, for improving and increasing. If we're at the same level of funding, that's wonderful. Yeah, that means the service will go forward. The service is subpar, and we need to continue to keep it in front of the public, and we need to study it. We need to see how we can increase and get along better with the freight trains, and how we can not put people on buses in the middle of their rail service. We just have to do better.
Brenda?
Just this morning, and Bill, I don't know if you have additional, the state of Oregon was awarded $1.2 million to install and test positive train control equipment to make our passenger rail system more safe. And so that announcement just came out this morning.
Oh, great.
Good.
Good.
It's a doorway.
Yes, yes, it
Yes.
is. Yeah. Hey, Sid?
So I have a question, and maybe this is to Paul and Brenda. So on that very item that Hillary's talking about, we have the 2021 World Games coming up. Is there an opportunity really to put forth what we maybe call, if we want to call it this, a pilot, where you have between Portland, in particular Portland and Eugene, where you have good solid rails. So because the reality is, all the hotels down here are not going to fill everybody. And the reality is this, most folks who are flying in here are going to fly into Portland and not necessarily Eugene. You may have folks flying into Eugene, but Portland is the one that's going to have the most capacity for the 217 countries or however many it is flying in. So what about talking to our delegation here state, here in Oregon, but also a federal delegation on we can call it a pilot, I don't know what you'd call it, I'm just throwing names out there, but where you have that consistent rail between Portland and Eugene, and that may lead to more of a permanence. So I don't know if that's something that can be discussed, or is that being discussed, I guess?
There was some mention of it. Obviously, nothing made it into the bill, and I think there's two ways that you can have that discussion, and it might be, again, possibly a point of discussion Monday for the United Front Group, or very soon over the next weeks as we move this bill forward. The two ways are that the bill doesn't address passenger rail at all.
Yeah.
So asking for it to do something, and asking for it to do that in the context of the 2021 games or other needs or other goals, greenhouse gas reductions, etc. The second way is the congestion work group, and we went through that congestion section, did talk about the funding of congestion relief doesn't just have to be highway capacity. It can be for funding for projects that reduce the demand, that relieve the capacity demands or issues on segments of the highways. So they've talked about funding freight transfer, intermodal type things that get the freight off the highway and onto rail. They've talked about, but nothing in the bill, funding passenger rail to remove trips off of I-5. And this is something that I think possibly this MPO, the Salem, Albany, even Corvallis and Portland MPOs could possibly all agree on as a message that as congestion relief, funding improvements to the passenger rail could fit in that pot of money.
I just think that you could use 2021 as the golden item 4 years out. I mean, you have something you can shoot for, so that's why I just threw that.
I was going to say the same sentiment. The 2021 games isn't the Eugene thing. It's a state of Oregon thing, and the whole world is going to be looking at this spot, and the fact that there's going to be so many people here, more than any other event that we've ever had, means that our hotels are going to be maxed out, or Airbnbs are going to be maxed out. That means people are going to stay in Albany and Corvallis and Salem and in Portland, and so having maybe a supplemental rail for that period of time, running up to it and thereafter, maybe the whole summer, seems to be a really smart thing to do, since you're just going to pack more people on I-5 and cause that much more problems. It would seem to be a really smart thing to do, that we're a forward-looking state to passenger rail for this corridor. And it could lead to something more permanent. So.
Do we engage Peter? No. Seems to me you'd want to engage DeFazio on this one, too. He's probably already engaged, but I don't know.
Well, when we go back on United Front, it's the river districts, and we use the 2021 consistently as a touch point of we've set 2021 out there because the games are coming, so it gives us a time frame to shoot for, and it is one time frame. I think that but it gives us the fact that, if I'm understanding Vinlanana correctly, that we have to use the entire state to hold the games anyway, because Hayward Field isn't going to be able to accommodate the whole track and field world for that period of time, that people are going to have to traverse up and down the freeway. And I don't know whether it's a threat, is we're going to have to hire some charter buses or something to go up and down all day long, because people are simply going to go up and down that corridor all day long, every day for a while, and we do have to have some mechanism to get them back and forth. And we all know that we want our passenger rail to be better than it is now, which is limping along at best. So I agree that, the 2021 games, the idea that just needs to be better, period, that we move freight off, and I don't know who would be in charge of, trying to put together that, maybe it's a one-page white paper that we can take back and give it to Peter or whatever to use, to talk more concretely about why that's an important factor in what we want to do, and not just limp it along and continue to do that.
Well, of course, Kitty has served on all of the rail committees, the statewide, both freight and passenger, so she'd be one to have really good ideas. But if we could get them thinking about working with the freight, who absolutely, at this point, has not wanted to even consider the importance of passenger rail. But if we could work with the freight industry and put a special Amtrak train on the track, even for that period of time that the games are in town, so that they could run a couple times a day and coordinate with the freight. If we could get them to work with us, it'd be amazing. But that would put it in front of everybody. That would be that would give us an opportunity to see how it worked, to get people thinking in that direction, to take the next step. So it really is worth pushing a little bit to try to make something happen.
Rail saved our bacon headline during the games.
Would it be inappropriate to ask that a future agenda item be kind of focused on transportation during the games? Because it is more than, it's rail and it's a lot of other things. And I imagine who's ever bringing the games to town is thinking about this, but I don't know who they are and what they're thinking. So I'm just wondering if it would be appropriate for us to have a full discussion on what transportation will look like during that busy time.
I don't know whether we had Vinland on or, we want to put it on a agenda item to have the folks come. They meet regularly.
Yeah, there's a group that's been working for
and they come and they meet with individual communities, and we talk about all of the needs. But it might be a good time frame, maybe right after the legislative session, because we're kind of keyed in on that, is to talk about what happens during the games and what sort of transportation needs, and it's people getting from hotels, it's a lot of it'll get handled right on campus for the athletes, but the spectators, the press, everyone else has to stay somewhere and move around, and where the venues actually are, which is, I think, where rail comes in. It might be up in Portland, you might have an event in Portland, so people are going to be moving back and forth. So I'm looking to everyone, do you want some sort of a broader transportation-based update from the group?
It'd be really useful. We've been working on it for a while.
Briefly, let me mention that ODOT is in the process of updating its public transportation plan, which to some degree deals with passenger rail. In fact, we're having a presentation at the upcoming June 14th Lane Act meeting. Some of you will be there. Representatives from ODOT Rail will be coming down to talk about the plan update. I'll make a point of asking them about whether they've given any consideration to the 2021 World Games and if the plan might address that in some way or generally.
Okay, that would be great. And maybe it's some combination for a presentation. Yes.
Just briefly, Paul, is it too late to get mention of improving passenger rail into this bill?
Study.
Yeah, study, exploration.
It's not too late to ask. I think it's too late to get it into the bill, however. But it doesn't ever hurt to ask. And you have Senator Beyer, who is co-chair of the committee, and just to remind him that that is a concern and an issue in this area as well as the state.
Good idea.
It's worth mentioning, and again, possibly on Monday. I don't know if it's something that you want to have as a priority bullet point for Monday, but it would be an opportunity to mention it. And as I said earlier, both as a standalone addition or as a concept for funding under the congestion relief
maybe there is something that I'm looking at you and the staff that's going up on Monday, is maybe take a look at. I have probably a preference for, okay, the congestion mitigation pieces are places where there's maybe some funding already, or, and this could be a part of it, is take a look at it from that perspective. They did have 5 committees that were working, and they did go out all over the state all last summer or whenever. And so they're pretty far down the road at the moment in terms of what they've put together. That is, pretty comprehensive at the moment.
Well, Senator Meyer was on that committee, the high-speed rail committee, so
Yeah.
maybe he would think of doing something.
So if rail's not in here, is it anywhere?
The ODOT
For
budget.
funding, it's in the ODOT budget?
Yeah, it's the ODOT budget bill, which is a separate bill that funds the department, is where the continued funding for ODOT's operation of our Amtrak service is.
That's where the 8.6 million is.
Yes.
So that's the only place it resides. Passenger rail stuff.
Correct.
Is in ODOT's budget. On a transportation package.
Just a reminder that the passenger rail was a heavy lift to get it funded
Yes.
at a minimum threshold in 2015.
Right.
That money came in at the very last
Very
second.
last.
It's actually safer to have it in the budget bill than in its
I
transportation
agree.
package, which may not end up in this version, so. Or pass at all. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the next update is OMPUC, and we met last Friday and went around and we went through the same things we've just gone through, and then we went and visited with some of the legislators and some of the other folks, and it was fun or not. So it was interesting.
Interesting.
It was interesting, depending on who you were speaking to, but we pretty much talked about the same issues that we talked about today, and visited and tried to convey where we came to agreement for the most part. We had agreement around the same issues that we talked about today. So, yes? Yeah.
Well, and I think it's important to note, I was not able to attend the OMPUC meeting, but I heard from the other NPO managers and some other people that it was effective, and it was good to have the 8 NPOs for the most part agreeing on a lot of the same points around this draft package, and that it was the final push to have some things that we see in here, such as the flexibility on those taxing districts and not having the stipulated match amount and all of that. But it was effective to have that day last Wednesday.
Very much so. I think that going into those meetings, the 50% match was what was going to be drafted into the bill, and it wasn't until after those meetings that that 50% match was modified to provide more flexibility.
Yeah, it is powerful because we are 2/3 of the population.
70%.
I think that 70% of the population of the state. So when we say that and say that, even if you live in a rural community, many times you work in the metro area, and so it affects everyone at some level, or freight, or whatever. So anyway, we spent a full day working on this. The act, I know.
We meet next week.
Meet next week? Okay.
June 14th, actually.
Oh, June 14th.
Yeah.
A week after that, okay.
And we're continuing to meet out at the county facilities. Even though we're moving into our new building, we're not ready to conduct meetings there, but we will be holding future meetings at the new building in Springfield.
Are there any big items on that meeting?
I mentioned the presentation on the Oregon Transportation Plan, Public Transportation Plan.
I'll be going over the legislative stuff again.
Update on the STIP.
Same day we're interviewing for candidates for our vacancy in the city council. There's conflicts with that meeting.
Claire and/or.
I don't believe there's
The mayor. Is there anything in
No
that that's gonna be a
action
big
items,
deal?
I don't believe there are any action items, so.
Oh, stuff we just went over.
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
All right, that helps that.
So we are going to actually end this meeting. There's next steps and agenda build, and we're meeting in Coburg City Hall, Council Chambers on July 6th, and we're looking forward to that. Anything else, next steps, or if not, I'm going to close the MPC meeting, but I have to open the meeting for the Metropolitan Cable Television Commission, for which Eugene, Lane County, and Springfield are the only members, so Coburg, feel free to not have to hang around for the next. I'm going to close the MPC meeting, and so just the 3 jurisdictions need to be here for the rest. Okay, and I open the, so I'm going to open the Cable TV Commission, Metropolitan Cable Television Commission meeting. And we have one item on the agenda, our PEG grant program.
Yeah, so Ann Davies, staff at LCOG. Do we want to stop right at 1:30, or do you guys go over the time?
Well, yeah, if you talk fast.
So I can
can
talk fast. I had a really fascinating 15-minute presentation that you're going to miss. The materials in your packet pretty much explain what you need to know. We have a process for taking the money that we get from Comcast each year and providing those to the PEG channels. We have $26,000 this year because we've been saving up money for City Hall. The applications are in the packet. We've gone through them. Ellen, did you pass out the criteria? So I wanted to put the criteria in front of you because that's what you're supposed to be relying on, and that's what staff looked at when we were looking at the applications and trying to figure out what to recommend. I did ask Neil Moyer to come in case you have any specific questions about the material, the equipment that they're asking for, because I only know their cameras and controllers. That's about all I know. A lot of the requests are based on the transition that they're going to be making to HD, or hoping to be making to HD in the next couple of years. So, if you have any questions?
Any questions? There's the 3 proposals. LCC and Eugene and
the first page after the memo is basically the recommendation from staff. It lists out the equipment.
So are there any questions, or we can entertain a motion?
I'll take a comment and then I'll make a motion. I thought this was a good compromise, kind of gave everybody a little bit. Didn't cut anybody out, but I think it got to the main things that needed to get done with this minimum, with the small amount of money that we have for this. So I'll move approval of the recommendation.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, carries. So
That was
it.
That was a fascinating
Very
30-second presentation.
All right, we did it. Thank you so much.
Get her done.
Okay.